We'd always heard the stories about the old, abandoned hospital on the edge of town. On a dare, my friends and I, Jack, Mike, Sarah and I, Tom, decided to explore it one night. The place was notorious for strange noises and ghostly apparitions. As we approached the building, the wind howled through broken windows, creating an eerie symphony. Jack, ever the fearless leader, pushed the creaking door open. We entered, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The corridors were lined with peeling paint and broken tiles. Faded medical charts fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. We stuck close together, our nervous laughter echoing through the halls. "Let's check out the operating room," Jack suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, holding his hand tightly, nodded in agreement. We followed, our footsteps echoing ominously. The operating room was the creepiest part of the hospital. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered, and an old, blood-stained gurney stood in the center. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. Sarah screamed, and we all spun around, hearts pounding. Mike tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. Then, we heard it, a faint, whispering voice, growing louder. It was unintelligible, but filled with sorrow and pain. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, his voice trembling. No answer, just the whispers growing closer. The temperature dropped, and our breath fogged in the cold air. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room. It moved towards us, and the whispers turned into agonized wails. We backed into a corner, huddling together, terrified. Just as quickly as it started, the figure vanished. The door creaked open on its own, and we wasted no time in escaping. We ran out of the hospital, not daring to look back. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night. We only know one thing for sure: the abandoned hospital was not as empty as we thought. I found myself wandering the desolate streets, searching for shelter. The abandoned house at the edge of town seemed like a refuge. It was old, with peeling paint and broken windows, but it would do. I decided to stay there for a week, just until I could figure out my next move. The first night I heard whispers. I brushed it off as the wind, but as the week went on, the whispers grew louder. On the third night, I woke up to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my makeshift bed. My heart pounded, but I couldn't move. The figure disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving me drenched in sweat and fear. By the fourth night, things took a darker turn. Objects started moving on their own. I watched in horror as an old chair slid across the room and the windows rattled violently. The whispers turned into voices, murmuring incoherent words that sent chills down my spine. On the fifth night, I decided to investigate. I found an old, dusty journal in a hidden compartment under the floorboards. The journal belonged to a previous resident who wrote about experiencing similar paranormal activities. The last entry was chilling. "They want me gone. I can't escape." The sixth night was the worst. I was awoken by a loud bang. The door to the room I was in slammed shut, trapping me inside. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the cold air. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I bolted for the door, and to my surprise, it opened. On the seventh day, I left the house, never to return. The fear and terror I experienced will haunt me forever. The abandoned house was no refuge. It was a prison for lost souls. I now understand why it was left to rot. We were ecstatic when we found the old house at the end of Maple Street. It had character, charm, and a price tag that seemed almost too good to be true. My wife Emily and I thought we had struck gold. Little did we know we had just moved into a nightmare. Our first few days were filled with the excitement of unpacking and decorating. The house was beautiful in its own way, with creaky wooden floors and vintage wallpaper. It felt like stepping back in time. But then, the odd things started happening. It began with small noises, footsteps echoing in the hall when we were both in bed, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. Emily tried to laugh it off, saying it was just the house settling, but I could see the unease in her eyes. One night, as we were drifting off to sleep, we heard a distinct knock on our bedroom door. I got up, opened it, and found nothing but an empty hallway. The next day, Emily found the basement door open, even though we were certain we had closed it the night before. She ventured down to check, only to rush back up, pale and trembling. "I heard someone breathing," she whispered. I went down to investigate, but found nothing unusual. As the days passed, the activity escalated. We would wake up to find furniture moved, pictures tilted, and strange symbols drawn in the dust on the windows. One night, we were jolted awake by the sound of the piano playing downstairs. Neither of us knew how to play, and the melody was hauntingly beautiful, yet deeply unsettling. The final straw came when Emily started seeing shadows. At first, it was just from the corner of her eye, fleeting glimpses that could be dismissed as tricks of the light. But soon, they became more pronounced. One evening, while cooking dinner, she screamed and dropped a pot of boiling water. She claimed she saw a dark figure standing behind me, its hand reaching out to touch my shoulder. Desperate for answers, we did some research on the house's history. We discovered that it had once belonged to a man named Samuel Blackwood, who was rumored to have been involved in dark rituals. The house had stood empty for years after his mysterious disappearance. No one in the neighborhood liked to talk about it. We decided to hold a séance, hoping to communicate with whatever was haunting us. We sat around the dining table, candles flickering, and called out to the spirits. At first there was nothing. Then the temperature dropped, and a cold wind swept through the room. The candles went out, and we heard a low guttural growl. The table shook violently, and we both screamed, bolting from the house. We stayed with friends that night and returned the next day only to gather our essentials. We couldn't stay another minute in that house. As we were leaving, I glanced back and saw a figure standing in the window, watching us. It looked like a man, but his eyes were empty voids. We sold the house at a loss and never looked back. The experience left us shaken, and we still have nightmares about it. Whatever was in that house wanted us gone, and we were all too happy to oblige. We've since moved to a small apartment in the city, far from the horrors of Maple Street. But sometimes late at night I can still hear those whispers, reminding me that some things are better left alone. I took the job at the old car junkyard on the edge of town because I needed the money. It seemed simple enough. Organize the wrecks, salvage what could be sold, and keep an eye out for trespassers. The place was massive, with rows upon rows of rusted, broken-down cars stacked high like a graveyard of automotive history. Little did I know, the junkyard had a history of its own. On my first night, as I walked through the maze of twisted metal, I felt an uneasy chill. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, making the old cars look like monstrous figures lurking in the dark. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild and continued with my work. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers, faint at first but unmistakable. I'd turn around expecting to see someone behind me, but there was never anyone there. The whispers grew louder each night, unintelligible but filled with a sense of urgency and despair. One evening, while sorting through a pile of parts, I noticed an old battered car that I hadn't seen before. Its headlights seemed to follow me as I moved. I laughed at my own paranoia and approached it, but as I got closer, I heard a soft sobbing coming from inside. My heart pounded as I peered through the shattered window. The interior was empty, yet the sobbing continued, echoing through the junkyard. Terrified, I backed away and stumbled over a pile of scrap metal, cutting my hand. The pain brought me back to my senses, and I ran for the gate. As I reached the exit, I heard a voice clear as day. "Leave while you still can." I didn't need to be told twice. I quit the next morning, leaving behind my tools and my curiosity. Whatever haunted that junkyard could keep its secrets. Some places, I realized, are abandoned for a reason.